Chapter 4. The box was heavier than it looked. Hugging it to my chest with both hands and staying low, I went headfirst into the bushes. I realized, perhaps by instinct, that the important thing to do right now was to run and not think. If I let myself think, I might get distracted with the innumerable unpleasant consequences that were more than likely to occur in the next 5 to 10 minutes. The corners of the box were digging into my arms, but there was no comfortable way of carrying it. I was dashing around a clump of aspens when suddenly I slipped and crashed, falling on the box. The box was fine, but it was built of sturdier stuff than I was. Bruised, scratched, and aching, I wished I had someone to complain to. Instead, I got back to my feet and continued to run. I did, however, pause in my mind to congratulate myself for always taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Marissa could say what she wanted to, but the truth was, if not for all those stairs, I'd be in bad shape right now. In the meantime, there was nothing to hear but the sound of my own clumsy attempts to keep myself from slipping and falling again. I had left level ground behind me and was doing my best to keep my footing as I scurried, half sliding, half running down the hill. I burst out of a thicket of trees and nearly tumbled right into the river. I looked back up the hill, hoping for some sign of Timothy or Richard, but the only sound I could hear was the plash of water on the rocks. Not daring to wait for them, I continued on, following the river as it plunged down the hill. With each step I took, however, there came the mounting sensation that I was on my own now. Feeling more lonely than scared, I finally permitted myself to pout. Timothy and Richard were probably captured by robbers by now and would be stuck in the mountains until their families delivered the ransom money. If I wasn't in such a hurry to get home, and if my own family had a bundle of unused cash lying around, I'd probably turn around and say, "Take me too." After all, I really wasn't looking forward to returning home. Oh, I miss my mothers and sisters, true. But what I did not miss was my Uncle William, Aunt Geraldine, and Cousin Lawrence. Ever since they'd moved in 4 years ago, home had become a rather uncomfortable place. Now, if Father and Mother had only managed to have a son, then Uncle William could have stayed in Michaelton and we could have all lived happily ever after. But after Father died, the estate fell to Uncle William. Funny how tragedies seem to come in threes. First Father dying, then Uncle William taking over the house, and then the fire that took out 5 acres of crops, the southeast barn, and the stables. We lost 4 horses in the coach that night. I remember the details too well, the noise and mayhem of the villagers helping us to put out the fire, Uncle William shouting orders at everyone and me covered in soot and cinders and my dress soaking wet from carrying water all night. When I saw the charred corpses of the horses and smelled the gut-wrenching smell of their burnt flesh, I dropped my bucket and ran. I didn't stop until I'd cleared the cypress avenue and made it far into the alfalfa. Then I screamed at the sky at the top of my lungs. Heaven had taken too much. I frowned. If bad things did happen in threes, then was losing the money number 1? Then being chased by the robbers and soldiers must surely be number 2. So what was the next disaster? I tried to push the thought away. But Timothy, what if the third disaster was Timothy? What if he had been hit by an arrow and was— No, I said firmly to myself, no. If Timothy does not show up soon, it means that he's been captured, either by the robbers or the KG. Unless, I thought as I looked down at the box in my arms, the KG were not concerned if Timothy were captured, dead or alive. I stopped and sat down on a stump. My hand slid over the varnished box, fingering the lock. It really was a pretty box, and solid, and old, like an antique. I tapped my fingers on the one thing that was not pretty, the steel lock. I was up to my neck in this, and I still had no clue what was inside. I looked around and scanned the trees, listening at the same time for any sign that I might not be alone. Satisfied, I turned my attention back to the lock on the box. It was no flimsy padlock, but the real thing. This box was meant to remain secure. What if I accidentally dropped the box and it opened? Really, what would be more natural than to drop a heavy box while running? Were there ethics involved? Maybe. Should I ponder them? Probably. However, in my life experience, I'd discovered by now that thinking too hard about anything usually led to indecision. To avoid this undesirable condition, I found it best to make the decision quickly and deal with the outcome as it came. I stood up, held the box high over my head, and dropped it on the rocks at my feet. It bounced and then fell still at the water's edge. I scurried over and examined the results. The results were disappointing. Whoever had made the box had gone to the trouble to do it right. Still, I was not going to give up after only one try. I climbed up on a rock and raised the box high into the air again. Only this time, instead of merely dropping it, I threw it. I threw it so hard that I lost my balance and came tumbling down in a clumsy heap. I stood up and rubbed my hip. One more bruise for the day. But just as I was bemoaning my delicate skin, I spotted the box where it was jammed in the shallow banks of the river. The lid was still attached, but it was now askew. Quickly, I rescued it from the water and found that one of the hinges was broken. I tucked the box in my hand so that the light from the sky could shine inside. Timothy had been telling the truth at the checkpoint. Whatever inside was valuable. That much color of gold couldn't be anything but valuable. I continued to peer inside, trying to make out what I was looking at, but it was no use. I had to get that box opened if I was to know it was so valuable that Timothy would risk our lives. I found some rocks and wedged them into the partly opened lid. Then, with a bigger rock, I hammered down on them until the other hinge finally broke. The lid burst open and a heavy barbell fell to the mud. Only it wasn't a barbell, it was a seal. A much larger seal than I had ever seen used before. I picked it up, and even though it wasn't a barbell, it was as heavy as one. Washing the mud off, I examined the lettering and image on the bottom. Of course, it was backwards, so it was difficult to make out what it said. Then, in a burst of brilliance, of which I am still proud today, I had the notion to stamp the thing in the mud. There, clear as day, was the image of a bear dancing with a snake, and the words, "Seal of the Royal Monarch." I was holding the royal seal, the very device that notarized the will and wishes of the king himself. Not only did it imprint in wax the royal emblem of the king, but it contained a unique electronic laser that tattooed the wax with a secondary imprint that could not be seen with human eyes. What was Timothy doing with something that should only ever be touched by royal hands? What was I doing, holding it in my hands? I quickly rinsed the thing off and pushed the seal back into the red velvet casing and slammed the lid down. I couldn't believe this. Timothy was a thief. And not just any thief, but a thief that stole royal treasures. How did this happen? What possible motive could he have had to do this kind of thing? His family were all such good people. I gasped and covered my mouth. His family. It was going to kill them when they found out what Timothy had done. John Robert Easton had served side by side with the king in the last war and had earned his knighthood. He was famous for being one of the king's most loyal supporters. Poor Sir John Robert. What would he do when he found out his son was stealing treasures from the royal treasury? No, I wasn't going to let this happen. I was a loyalist too when it came down to it. Not only that, I was too fond of Timothy's family to let this disgrace fall on them. I looked down at the box and made a decision. Timothy was not getting this back. Not far from the river, I found an old stump that was hollow inside. I stuffed the box deep down as I could, and then filled the top with a layer of dirt and last year's leaves. Then, to mark it, I put two big rocks side by side in front of the stump. After that, I walked down to the river to wash the dirt off of my hands. As I dipped my fingers into the water, I suddenly realized how thirsty I was. Being thirsty led me to realize I was also hungry. Being hungry made me remember that Timothy had sent me off without a single bite of food to carry with me. This thought was just settling in when I heard footsteps behind me. I swung around. Not one, not two, but three men stood above me on the ridge, each dressed in dirty, if not colorful, clothes. Quickly I spoke while I still had a chance to speak. "I'm the niece of William Blackwood," I said to the man nearest me, who was holding a wicked-looking knife. "If you treat me well, I'll see that you're well paid." "Oh, I know who you are," one of them said, stepping forward. He pulled from his jacket a set of papers and held them up. "Even if I hadn't found your charters on your horse, I would still recognize Miss Lisbette Blackwood of Brindlelock Estate. Yes, your uncle will pay dearly for your return. I'll see to that."